It begins not with a revelation but with a silence so deep that it seems to hum beneath the stone, beneath the desert, beneath the heartbeat of time itself. The Great Sphinx of Giza, a face half human, half lion, has watched civilizations rise and fall, yet its eyes have never blinked. What does it remember that we have forgotten? What language does it speak in the hush of night when the wind brushes against its ancient skin? Tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Let's drift together into the sand and the dark below the lion's paws. For centuries, the Sphinx was nothing more than a buried head emerging from dunes, its massive body lost under centuries of shifting sand. Only the top of its head, worn smooth by the desert wind, was visible when Napoleon's scholars documented the Sphinx in 1798, finding only its weathered head visible above the sand, the massive body lost beneath centuries of desert drift. Even then, they sensed it was a relic, perhaps older than Egypt itself. But no one could imagine that beneath that head lay a secret deeper than stone. It wasn't until the late 20th century that technology began to listen to what the sands had hidden. In 1991, a team of American researchers led by geophysicist Thomas Whitfield conducted ground-penetrating radar studies around the Sphinx. The results were startling. Beneath the monument, beneath the paws, and extending toward the rear haunches were anomalies, rectangular cavities, symmetrically positioned and deliberately shaped beneath the monument's central axis. They weren't natural fissures in the rock. They were chambers. The data was clear, but almost as soon as it was released, discussion was silenced. Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities denied further exploration. The findings vanished from public record. Why? What could possibly rest beneath the Sphinx that a nation would prefer the world not to see? It is strange how history sometimes behaves like a guardian, not revealing truth, but concealing it. Ancient Egypt was a civilization obsessed with continuity, preservation, and the bridging of worlds. Yet under this monument, there is something that threatens to rewrite its own chronology. For if those chambers are man-made, and if their age predates the Old Kingdom, then the entire foundation of Egyptian history must be reimagined. Whispers of these discoveries traveled quietly through academic circles in the early 1990s until they reached independent researchers who refused to let the silence settle. Graham Blackfield, the maverick author whose works challenged orthodox timelines, and Anthony Sheffield, an independent Egyptologist, confirmed that the patterns indeed suggested voids, possibly connected tunnels. Their seismic data hinted at something older, something weathered by water rather than wind. But again, permits to excavate were denied. The official narrative remained firm. There is nothing beneath the Sphinx but bedrock. And yet, the instrument said otherwise. Imagine standing there at dusk, the golden light sliding down the lion's flank, the pyramids behind casting long, solemn shadows. The air cools, but the ground below hums faintly like a restrained breath. What if the Sphinx is not merely carved from stone, but carved around something? A marker placed atop an entrance to memory. In 1993, Anthony Sheffield, who had long questioned the orthodox timeline of Egypt's monuments, called the Sphinx a riddle written in erosion. He believed it was older than dynastic Egypt, perhaps by thousands of years. The weathering patterns on its body spoke of water, not sand, torrential rain, flowing channels, rounded grooves, all impossible in the Sahara of the last 5,000 years. The Sphinx, he argued, must have existed when the land was still green, perhaps 10,500 years ago. If that were true, it would predate the very dawn of known civilization. It would mean that the builders of the Sphinx belonged to a forgotten epoch, one erased from the visible record, but not from the earth itself. Soon after these claims gained traction, Egyptian authorities grew uneasy. Ahmad Mansouri, then rising in prominence as a guardian of Egypt's antiquities, dismissed such theories as fantasy. "There is nothing under the Sphinx," he said, "only solid limestone." Yet years later, in interviews, he would admit that there were indeed small tunnels and hollows, though they were declared natural. The contradiction lingered, half-spoken like a riddle, left deliberately unsolved. Tourists see the Sphinx as a monument of majesty. But archaeologists who listen differently sense a tension beneath it, between what is seen and what is known. The monument sits precisely on the east-west axis, its gaze fixed toward the rising sun. Every morning it greets the rebirth of light, as if remembering a covenant older than God's. Beneath it, somewhere in the cool belly of limestone, lies the possibility of a chamber untouched for millennia, a sealed silence within the silence. And what if something rests there? Not treasure, not gold, but a record. Ancient texts speak of hidden archives beneath sacred places, halls that preserve the memory of a world before the flood. The Hall of Records mentioned in Hermetic and later esoteric traditions were said to contain the wisdom of the ages before time, buried to protect it from human corruption. Such tales were dismissed as myth, but myths often begin as distorted memories. What would happen if Egypt unearthed something that didn't fit the accepted order of history? Something that hinted humanity's story was older, more cyclical, more mysterious than we are allowed to imagine? The sands are quiet now. The official tours walk above the ground, not below. The air hums with heat, the scent of dust, and the strange certainty that the desert remembers everything, even what we choose to forget. In 2023, renewed scanning projects again hinted at hidden structures. Beneath the plateau, patterns of voids and unexpected densities. The data was published briefly, then withdrawn. The more technology we have, the more silence seems to follow discovery. It is as though the Sphinx itself commands that silence, as though it whispers in the unspoken language of stone. You're not ready. And perhaps we are not. For what sleeps beneath the paws of the lion may not be a relic, but a warning, a reminder that every civilization builds atop the bones of another, that beneath every truth we stand on, there is a hollow waiting to speak. When the wind stills and the desert grows cold, one might imagine hearing the faint echo of that hollow, not empty, but listening. So the question lingers beneath the weight of sand and centuries. If the Sphinx guards something beneath its paws, then who or what does it guard it from? It is strange how silence can echo louder than sound. The sand around the Sphinx hums faintly at night, as if beneath it something stirs, restless but patient. Those who once dared to probe deeper spoke of a void, a chamber hidden beneath the lion's immense paws. But in Egypt, mysteries often end not with revelation, but with restriction. In the years after the first seismic scans revealed hollow anomalies, the Egyptian authorities halted all excavations under the monument. Officially, the decision was to preserve heritage. Unofficially, it was to preserve control. The idea of a hidden chamber beneath the Sphinx did not begin with radar or modern science. It had been whispered about for centuries, a rumor older than archaeology itself. The Greeks believed that beneath the Giza Plateau lay a labyrinth of passages, the entrance to which was sealed by the priests of ancient times. Arab chroniclers in the Middle Ages spoke of tunnels filled with inscriptions older than the flood. And then in the 20th century, the rumor was reborn through the voice of a man who had never seen Egypt, the American clairvoyant Edgar Cayce. Cayce, in a trance, spoke of a hall of records buried beneath the right paw of the Sphinx, a vault preserving the knowledge of a lost civilization destroyed by flood. He claimed it would be discovered when humanity was ready to understand its past anew. His words were dismissed as mysticism. Yet strangely, when modern instruments later detected voids in precisely that location, some began to wonder if myth and science had brushed fingertips. Was Casey delusional? Or was he remembering something that history had forgotten? The notion of a subterranean archive, a place where truth was hidden rather than destroyed, has haunted Egyptology for decades. Within the Hermetic tradition, said to preserve the teachings of Thoth or Hermes Trismegistus, there is a passage describing a vault where all the wisdom of the ages is stored for those who will come after the great deluge. This image of knowledge safeguarded from catastrophe recurs in many traditions. The Sumerian tablets that survived the flood, the Tibetan caves said to house cosmic scrolls, even the biblical Ark of the Covenant as a vessel of divine instruction. Perhaps all these stories point to one archetype, that somewhere in the deep earth lies a record of what came before us. In the late 1970s, researchers reported faint tunnels beneath the Sphinx extending toward the Pyramid of Khafra. Photographs taken during early excavations showed sealed doors, carved stone corridors, and what appeared to be hieroglyphic marks erased or plastered over. Yet none of this entered official documentation. The narrative was cleaned, sterilized, reissued. Egypt, whose history had already been rewritten many times, would not allow another rewriting, especially one that might undermine the chronology on which its cultural identity rested. For those who look deeper, the pattern feels deliberate. In 1996, Mansouri publicly denied the existence of any chamber, calling the idea nonsense. Yet years later, in a quietly circulated interview, he admitted there was a cavity beneath the pause, but it is not man-made, he insisted. He described it as natural fissures. Even then, the description wavered between denial and evasion, as though the truth had been classified. It is easy to dismiss conspiracy, yet it is harder to ignore the consistency of suppression. Each time new evidence emerges, access is restricted. Each time a new theory suggests that the Sphinx predates dynastic Egypt, funding evaporates. The keepers of knowledge, it seems, are guarding not just stone, but narrative. What might they fear if the chamber beneath the Sphinx were proven to be artificial? If inscriptions or artifacts within pointed to a civilization older than Egypt, one capable of monumental architecture and astronomical design, it would dismantle the linear timeline of human progress. It would suggest that history is not a ladder, but a circle. That knowledge has risen and fallen like tides, that we have forgotten far more than we have learned. In the 1930s, British Egyptologist E.A. Wallace Budge hinted that Egypt's priesthood inherited, rather than created, its wisdom. He wrote that the earliest magicians and builders were not of Egyptian stock, but strangers who came before the flood. The statement was largely ignored, filed away among eccentric commentaries. But what if Budge was right? Ancient Egyptian texts sometimes speak of the Zep Tepi, the first time. It was not a mythic dawn, but a memory, a golden age when the gods walked with men, when the land was green, and when the great temples were founded according to the pattern of the sky. The priests of later dynasties said their ancestors built according to those divine blueprints, not by invention, but by imitation. They called themselves keepers of the measure. If Zep Tepi was not legend but history, then the Sphinx might not be Egyptian at all, merely adopted into its mythos like a relic inherited from a vanished world. The image of a lion, facing east, aligned with the constellation Leo, is older than the pharaohs. In 10,500 BCE, the constellation Leo rose on the horizon precisely where the Sphinx now gazes. Could this alignment be accidental? Or could it mark the memory of a time before time when this monument served as a cosmic marker for the survivors of a cataclysm? Beneath the pause, some have claimed, is a sealed entrance, an aperture long buried. During restoration work in 1926, photographs captured an opening between the four legs leading into the limestone base. The passage was later filled and forgotten. The official explanation: structural weakness. But what if the entrance led downward? The possibility alone unsettles those who guard Egypt's monuments. For in the deep underground of Giza, there are catacombs, some mapped, most unexplored, stretching toward the Nile. The late explorer Andrew Collins documented a series of natural caves beneath the plateau, large enough to house chambers, sealed corridors, perhaps even what the ancients called the House of Osiris. In one photograph, hieroglyphs carved onto a blocked doorway depict the symbol of the lion, guardian of thresholds. Could the Sphinx have been placed deliberately atop that gate to guard it forever? It is said that all who have tried to pierce the secret have been silenced, not by curse, but by bureaucracy. Excavations denied, permits revoked, archives locked. Silence has become the Sphinx's truest servant. And yet the sands shift, technology improves. Each decade brings instruments more sensitive, capable of detecting the faintest void. Every time the machines hum, the same patterns reappear beneath the pause, rectangular anomalies perfectly centered. And each time the findings are quietly buried under reports that never see print. Perhaps what lies beneath the Sphinx is not a threat to history, but to the illusion of its completeness. To admit a missing chapter is to admit that we know almost nothing. The desert keeps its promises. It buries, but it also preserves. If a hall of records exists, it may not be waiting for discovery. It may be waiting for permission. Permission not from Egypt, but from us, from the human mind, which still trembles before the thought that our story may have begun long before writing, long before stone, long before the gods themselves. Beneath the pause of the Sphinx, the forgotten chamber remains sealed, not by stone, but by fear. And in that silence, one question breathes quietly through the sand. If the truth of our origin sleeps there, who decided we should never wake it? The Sphinx does not weep, yet the marks on its body speak of water. Deep vertical grooves and rounded channels scar its limestone skin as though rivers once caressed it, or storms once battered its flanks. These are not the wounds of wind. They are the memory of rain, rain that has not touched the Giza Plateau for more than 7,000 years. And in that single geological contradiction lies one of the most haunting enigmas of human history. For most of the 20th century, the official story was simple. The Great Sphinx was carved around 2560 BCE during the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, builder of the Second Pyramid. Its lion's body and human head symbolized royal power, a fusion of might and wisdom. But the stone does not lie, even when the historians do. In 1991, a quiet American geologist named Robert Schoch examined the erosion patterns on the Sphinx and came to a conclusion that shattered this elegant narrative. He saw water. Schoch, trained to read landscapes as living archives, recognized that the type of erosion covering the Sphinx was not caused by sand or wind, but by long-term heavy rainfall. The kind that falls over centuries in a temperate climate, not a desert. He compared the weathering on the Sphinx with that on nearby tombs, built from the same rock but cut in later dynasties. The difference was unmistakable. The Sphinx's erosion ran deep, curving, vertical, sculpted by cascading water. The others showed sharp, horizontal weathering shaped by millennia of arid wind. The implications were terrifyingly vast. If the Sphinx bore the marks of rain, then it must have been carved before Egypt became a desert. Before 5000 BCE, possibly as far back as 10,500 BCE. That would mean that the monument predates not only Khafra, but the entire known span of Egyptian civilization. It would mean that its builders were unknown, their names erased, their existence forgotten. When Schoch presented his findings at the Geological Society of America in 1992, he expected debate. Instead, he encountered outrage. Egyptologists, fiercely protective of their established chronology, rejected the idea outright. Mansouri dismissed him as a man who knows rocks, not history. But the irony is that rocks remember better than people. Schoch was not alone. Anthony Sheffield, the maverick researcher who first invited Schoch to study the monument, believed the Sphinx belonged to a civilization lost in the deep time of prehistory, perhaps the same epoch Plato described as Atlantis. Sheffield called it the fingerprint of a forgotten science. For him, the erosion wasn't merely geological. It was symbolic, an imprint of an ancient world washed away by the flood that legends still mourn. Mainstream archaeologists fought back with ferocity. They claimed the erosion came from groundwater, not rainfall, that it could be explained without rewriting history. Yet groundwater erosion creates patterns at the base, not the head. It seeps, it doesn't cascade. The stone story refused to conform. The argument grew not only scientific, but ideological. If Schoch was right, the foundations of human history, our slow climb from hunter-gatherers to city builders, would have to be rewritten. Civilization would no longer be a miracle of 3000 BCE, but the rebirth of something older, something cyclical. And that idea was unacceptable. In the early 1990s, the Egyptian Antiquities Organization tightened control over Giza. Access to the Sphinx enclosure was restricted. Permits for independent researchers vanished. The very site where geology whispered of an earlier age became a fortress of silence. Those who asked too loudly were branded heretics. But the rocks kept speaking. Satellite images showed similar weathering on nearby limestone cliffs cut by ancient rains. Deep beneath Cairo, geological cores confirmed that between 10,500 and 7,000 BCE, the region had indeed been lush, watered by monsoon systems long since gone. The Sahara was once green, a cradle, not a grave. Could it be that the Sphinx was carved when Egypt was not yet desert? When rivers flowed across its plains and forests crowned its ridges? The question haunted Schoch. He returned to Giza several times, measuring, re-examining, recalculating. The evidence remained the same. Every groove, every rounded hollow, every softened edge of limestone told the same story: water falling from the sky. What kind of world existed then, 10,500 years ago, capable of carving such a monument? No known culture, no pottery, no writing, no tools from that epoch could account for such mastery of engineering, symmetry, and astronomical precision. Unless the Sphinx was not a creation of a forgotten people, but a survivor of them. The myth of Atlantis speaks of a mighty civilization drowned by flood around 9600 BCE, the same period suggested by the Sphinx's erosion. Plato's account, often dismissed as allegory, matches the geological record almost too well. At the end of the last ice age, vast floods swept across continents. Sea levels rose more than 300 feet, and entire landscapes vanished beneath the waves. Could the Sphinx have been a marker, a monument left by survivors, a memory in stone of a world that perished? The Egyptians themselves seemed to believe their wisdom came from an age before their own. The priests of Sai told Solon that Egypt had preserved the memory of the earlier ages lost to the Greeks. "You Greeks are children," they said. "You have no old men among you." Egypt's temples were built on the remnants of something older still, a sacred geography inherited from a vanished age. The Sphinx, they said, was Ra-Horakhti, the sun in its horizon, the guardian of the dawn. Perhaps that dawn was not metaphorical. Perhaps it was the literal sunrise after a cataclysmic night. In later centuries, the weathered lines of the Sphinx were patched, smoothed, rebuilt. Pharaohs carved inscriptions to claim ownership, their hieroglyphs covering surfaces already ancient. The face was recut, perhaps reshaped into a likeness of Khafra, hiding the true identity beneath. Each restoration was not merely repair but overwriting, a palimpsest of power. Yet the erosion on the back and flanks cannot be erased. It remains as testimony to an age when rain fell where desert now burns. And so the Sphinx becomes both monument and witness, not to one, civilization, but to many. Beneath its worn surface lies the trace of a pre-human memory, a world that breathed before ours. If the geologists are correct, the Sphinx was built in a climate utterly different from today's, carved perhaps as a message, perhaps as a warning, a lion watching the rising sun of Leo, a marker of precession, of time's endless turning. Those who carved it may have known that the sky itself would one day move on, that their world would drown and ours would forget. What does it mean when stone remembers what we do not? Perhaps the Sphinx does not belong to Egypt, but to the planet, an inheritance from a cycle long before the pharaohs, long before names. And if that is true, then the question that haunts Giza is no longer who built it, but why was it left for us to find? For the water that shaped the Sphinx is gone, but its echoes remain. In every line carved by the vanished rain, the monument seems to murmur, "You have been here before." Maybe that is the real riddle, not who carved the lion, but how many times humanity has forgotten how to carve it at all. And somewhere beneath the pause, in that forbidden hollow, perhaps the answer waits. Patient as stone, ancient as rain. If the Sphinx truly predates the pharaohs, then its builders were not Egyptian, at least not in any sense that history recognizes. This thought alone unsettles the comfortable order of time. It implies a civilization lost not to conquest, but to forgetting. A people who carved with such precision that their monument still defies the desert's decay, yet who left no name, no language, no trace, only silence and stone. Who were they? Archaeologists recoil from that question. To ask it is to walk beyond the borders of what can be proven, and yet absence itself is evidence. If the Sphinx was indeed shaped when Egypt was green, its creators must have lived in a world unrecognizable to us, a Nile valley not of sand, but of forest and flood plain, where rains fell from heavy skies and herds of antelope grazed among acacias. In that world, humanity was awakening from the Ice Age. The sea was lower. The constellations hung differently in the sky, and the knowledge to carve stone on such a scale should not have existed. But it did. In the 1990s, astronomer Robert Schoch noticed something extraordinary about the layout of the Giza Plateau. The three pyramids were not randomly arranged. They mirrored almost perfectly the three stars of Orion's belt, Alnitak, Alnilam, and Mintaka. Moreover, the alignment made sense not in the sky of the pharaoh's time, but around 10,500 BCE, the same epoch implied by Schoch's erosion data. In that distant age, the constellation Leo, the lion, rose precisely on the horizon where the Sphinx gazes. The pattern was elegant, impossible to dismiss. It was as if the entire plateau was designed as a map of the heavens, frozen in stone to mark a celestial event now lost to human memory. What mind conceives such harmony? Between earth and sky? Böval's theory was ridiculed at first, dismissed as coincidence, but mathematics does not lie. The angular separation, the stellar precession, the exact orientation to the rising of Orion's belt at the meridian, all matched. The builders of Giza, it seemed, possessed astronomical knowledge thousands of years ahead of their supposed time. If the Sphinx marks Leo and the pyramids mark Orion, then the Nile itself mirrors the Milky Way, the river of stars flowing through heaven. It is a cosmogram, a sacred mirror. To design such a pattern required not only geometry but philosophy, an understanding that Earth and cosmos reflect each other, that as above, so below. This phrase, as above, so below, would later appear in Hermetic texts attributed to Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom whom the Greeks called Hermes Trismegistus. But perhaps it was not invention. Perhaps it was remembrance, a whisper from those who first mapped the heavens in stone. Whoever they were, they understood scale not as size, but as resonance. The dimensions of the Great Pyramid encode the ratio of the Earth's circumference to its polar radius. The Sphinx faces due east with less than half a degree of deviation, a precision only modern instruments can measure. And if its construction truly belongs to a forgotten age, then our ancestors' ignorance is a myth we tell ourselves to feel unique. What if intelligence did not begin with us, but returned to us? Some researchers speak of an archaic science, not mechanical but harmonic, in which architecture, sound, and celestial motion were parts of a single language. The Sphinx, in this view, was not merely sculpture, but a tuning fork of stone. Its proportions follow the golden ratio. Its alignment interacts with the solstices and equinoxes. Even the subterranean cavities beneath it could have amplified sound or energy, rituals of resonance rather than technology. This may sound mystical, but even NASA's physicists admit that stone, vibration, and geometry can affect fields of sound and magnetism. The ancients may have used what we call acoustics to awaken something within space itself, an architecture of frequency. Perhaps the Sphinx is not only the guardian of the past, but also the echo of an experiment, a bridge between mind and matter. But how could such knowledge vanish? How could a people who mastered the alignment of stars and stone disappear without leaving even a tool behind? The end of the Ice Age was not gentle. As glaciers melted, seas rose violently, swallowing coastlines, cities, and memory. What we call prehistory may simply be what remains after the floods erased everything. The fertile plains of the eastern Mediterranean drowned, and with them the places that once pulsed with early civilization. What survived was not civilization, but fragments, survivors wandering inland, carrying only myths of what had been lost. Perhaps these refugees of time brought their knowledge. To the Nile, carved a symbol of their origin, the lion of the stars, and built it where sunrise would forever mark their remembrance. The Sphinx could have been a memorial, not a monument. In the myths of Egypt, the lion is a guardian of thresholds, the keeper between worlds. In the Book of the Dead, lions guard the gates of the underworld, where souls pass through judgment. In the stars, Leo guards the eastern sky, the door of dawn. Everywhere the lion stands between darkness and light, memory and oblivion. It is not difficult to imagine the builders seeing themselves the same way, as guardians between ages, standing at the edge of one world's destruction and another's birth. Their monument was their promise that knowledge, once carved, would never die completely. And yet the irony endures. We have found their stones, but not their names. We admire their skill, but deny their existence. Modern history refuses to acknowledge that intelligence might precede civilization. We prefer a story where progress begins with us, where the line of time moves only forward. But perhaps time is a circle, and the builders of the Sphinx once stood where we stand now, confident, proud, unaware that the tide of forgetting would rise again. If we listen closely, the Sphinx seems to murmur beneath the desert wind, not with words, but with weight. Its stillness is a language, a geometry of silence. And in that silence, one can almost feel the presence of minds that looked up at the same stars we do, and saw not chaos, but memory. Were they gods, as the Egyptians later believed, or simply humans who remembered more than we do now? Maybe the distinction no longer matters. For to carve a lion facing the sunrise, aligned with the eternal heavens, is to declare that nothing ever truly ends, that civilizations may crumble, but the measure of the sky remains. And so the Sphinx endures, half buried, half remembered, a riddle left by architects who built not for glory, but for remembrance. What if their message was never meant to be read, but felt? Perhaps the Sphinx is not waiting for discovery, but for recognition, for the moment humanity looks again at the stars and remembers what it once knew. And when that happens, perhaps the sand itself will shift, and beneath the lion's paws, the architects from the edge of time will stir again, not as bodies, but as memory returning to light. Long before the tourists and their cameras, before the guides with their rehearsed myths, before the gates that fence the plateau, there were priests, silent, deliberate, and bound by oaths older than empire. They walked among the shadows of the Sphinx, as if among a living god. To them, this monument was not a mystery to be solved, but a covenant to be guarded. Whatever lay beneath its paws was not meant for the eyes of the ordinary. It was the sacred wound of the earth, sealed not with stone, but with secrecy. Every civilization needs its guardians of silence. In ancient Egypt, the priesthood served as both keepers of knowledge and protectors of ignorance. They decided what could be spoken, what could be carved, and what must remain hidden. To them, wisdom was not a gift for the masses, but a flame too dangerous to leave unguarded. The word for priest, hem, means servant of the god. Yet those who served often became masters of information, custodians of memory and engineers of forgetting. When the pharaoh ruled by divine right, it was the priests who defined what divine meant. They read the stars, recorded floods, guided the dead through ritual, and interpreted dreams. But more than that, they controlled the metaphysics of Egypt, the delicate equilibrium between heaven and earth, between knowledge and chaos. The deeper truths of the temples, the alignments of the pyramids, and the rituals that once echoed in the subterranean chambers were never written plainly. They were encoded in geometry, rhythm, and sound, hidden within walls, chants, and myths, so that only the initiated could see the full pattern. Perhaps this is why no ancient text speaks directly of what lies beneath the Sphinx. To write it would have been betrayal. To reveal it would have been to tear the veil between gods and men. The Greeks, when they came later, found Egypt already ancient. They admired its order, its symmetry, its serene defiance of decay. Yet they sensed the presence of something unspoken. Plato wrote that the Egyptian priests held knowledge of floods and fires that had destroyed humanity many times before. Herodotus, too, spoke of underground chambers beneath temples guarded from outsiders, but none could enter. None could verify. It was as if Egypt itself had conspired to protect its prehistory, as though secrecy was the oldest language it spoke. The Sphinx, in this sense, was not merely a monument, but a threshold, a stone manifestation of the priestly principle, the division between the known and the unknowable. Beneath its gaze, the rituals of initiation took place, the symbolic death of ignorance, the rebirth into sight. Those who passed through the mystery did not emerge with answers, but with deeper questions. To be enlightened in that world was to be trusted with the burden of silence. And so the Sphinx endured as an altar of restraint. Empires rose around it, but none dared to open the ground below. The priests of the Old Kingdom were replaced by the cults of Osiris and Ra, by Ptolemaic priests under Greek rule, and later by Coptic monks who carved crosses into its flanks. Yet the essential law remained. The secret must remain buried. Why? What truth could be so dangerous that it must be hidden across millennia? Some suggest it was political, that early dynasties feared the revelation of their borrowed glory, that they had inherited more than they had built. Others believe it was metaphysical, that beneath the Sphinx lies not an artifact but a frequency, a field of power that must not be disturbed. A few even claim that the Sphinx guards the axis of the Earth's memory, the point where matter and consciousness once met. Whatever the reason, every attempt to probe its depths has met resistance. In the 1920s, French engineer Émile Barrès, tasked with restoring the monument, discovered a sealed door in the bedrock near its rump. He explored briefly, but his documentation was never completed, the findings curiously absent from archives. In the 1950s, Egyptian archaeologist Selim Hassan unearthed a tunnel beneath the nearby temple of the Sphinx, leading toward its body. The entrance was quickly closed, the discovery dismissed as insignificant. In the 1990s, when seismic surveys hinted at a chamber beneath the pause, the government imposed new restrictions: no excavations, no independent verification, no dissent. It is as if the priesthood never ended, only changed its form. Where once the keepers wore linen and gold, now they wear suits and credentials. The oaths are bureaucratic, not sacred, but the silence is the same. Modern Egypt guards its monuments with the same jealousy that its ancestors guarded their gods, and perhaps rightly so. To open the Sphinx is to open history itself. It would mean facing not only what lies beneath, but what we have chosen not to see above. Imagine for a moment the ancient ceremonies once held at dusk. The last rays of the sun touching the Sphinx's brow, priests standing in perfect formation, their chants harmonizing with the vibration of stone. They believed that sound could awaken the monument, not physically, but spiritually, that its body resonated with the earth's own pulse. The chants were not prayers but equations. Each syllable corresponded to a measure of time, each breath a rhythm of the cosmos. To mispronounce was to risk disharmony, to awaken forces that must remain still. The Sphinx was both participant and instrument in this symphony, a bridge between worlds. And those who guarded it knew that bridges can collapse if crossed by the unready. Centuries later, when the old priesthood was destroyed by foreign rule, fragments of its knowledge survived, absorbed into Hermeticism, Gnosticism, and alchemy. Symbols of lions, suns, and eyes reappeared in temples of entirely different faiths, their meanings diluted but not erased. Even in medieval Europe, whispers persisted of Egyptian guardians who preserved forbidden truth through secret orders. Some believed the Freemasons inherited these mysteries. Others said the Vatican locked them away. Yet always the core remained unchanged. Knowledge must be earned, not given. Maybe that is the legacy of the Sphinx, not the chamber, not the prophecy, but the principle of concealment itself. To look upon it is to be reminded that truth cannot simply be uncovered like an artifact. It must be approached with reverence, patience, and awe. For even now, in the modern age, the Sphinx continues its role as teacher through silence. Scientists measure its erosion. Tourists photograph its face. Skeptics scoff at its legends. But the monument remains unmoved, unyielding, as if to say, "You may measure my stone, but you will not measure my meaning." Perhaps the priesthood was right. Perhaps some truths are not ready to be spoken, and yet the silence grows heavy. The world that once revered secrets now demands exposure. We dig, scan, and speculate, convinced that knowledge itself is salvation. But what if understanding the Sphinx means facing a mirror too vast? One that shows us the cycles of forgetting we ourselves perpetuate? In the night, when the desert wind falls still, the Sphinx seems almost to breathe. The stars rise above it in slow procession, the same stars its builders once traced. Somewhere beyond the reach of time, perhaps the old priests are still keeping watch, their oaths intact, their silence unbroken. And under their eternal gaze, a single question lingers like sand suspended in air. If knowledge was once guarded so fiercely, was it to protect the secret, or to protect us from it? Beneath the stillness of the Sphinx, there is a faint trembling, not of the earth, but of something older, slower, almost alive. Seismic instruments once caught it, rhythmic fluctuations, as if the ground itself were breathing. Scientists called it resonance, others called it memory. But to those who have stood between the lion's colossal paws and felt that unexplainable vibration beneath their feet, it feels like the pulse of time itself, echoing from something buried deep below. It was in 1991 when the first seismic readings beneath the Sphinx stunned researchers. The data revealed symmetrical anomalies, rectangular in shape, nearly 20 meters beneath the surface. The anomaly extended eastward toward the monument's chest, aligned perfectly with its central axis. It was not random, not natural, and certainly not the product of geological chance. To geophysicists, it looked deliberate, constructed. But before questions could form into excavations, the authorities intervened. The project was stopped, access revoked, reports sealed. This abrupt silence was not new. Beneath Egypt's surface lies a history of interruptions, discoveries halted just before revelation. In the case of the Sphinx, each new generation of explorers finds evidence of hollow spaces, tunnels, or corridors that seem to vanish the moment they are found, as if the monument itself decides when to be seen. Those who have studied the Sphinx closely speak of an uncanny symmetry. Its paws, outstretched like twin pillars, form a gateway between the seen and the unseen. Between them lies the dream stela erected by Pharaoh Thutmose IV, who claimed the Sphinx spoke to him in his sleep, promising kingship if he freed it from the sands. The stela stands like a warning and a confession. Thutmose called the Sphinx Harmakis, Horus of the horizon, a being both celestial and terrestrial, both god and guardian. Perhaps his dream was not metaphor, but memory. Perhaps the monument did speak, in vibrations, in frequencies that human consciousness can only perceive in the threshold between waking and sleep. The Sphinx has long been suspected of concealing something beneath. The earliest explorers of the 19th century recorded stories from local villages about hollow sounds when striking the ground near its chest. Others claimed that camels refused to approach the eastern side after dusk, as if disturbed by a resonance inaudible to human ears. Egyptian priests of the late New Kingdom called the area Sekhet Netjer, the field of the gods. When modern engineers first attempted restoration in the 1920s, they too encountered strange cavities. Some were dismissed as erosion channels, others sealed without investigation. A handful of workers claimed to have entered a tunnel running beneath the paws, leading into darkness before collapsing. Officially, none of this happened. But the whispers remained. What if the Sphinx's paws are not merely structural, but symbolic? Guardians of an entrance, not a monument. In myth, the lion is always the sentinel of thresholds, the guardian of gates, temples, and tombs. Its posture, reclining, alert, eternal, suggests vigilance. Those outstretched paws may not hold the earth, but hide a door into the underworld. In 1993, when Thomas Whitfield and his team's seismic readings detected the cavities, speculation ignited worldwide. Could this be the fabled Hall of Records, the archive of a vanished civilization, or was it merely an ancient burial chamber forgotten beneath the bedrock? The Egyptian Antiquities Council issued statements denying all such claims, yet their denials grew strangely specific. If there was truly nothing there, why specify what kind of nothing it was? Rumors circulated among the workers on the plateau. Foreign teams had been removed at night, their equipment confiscated. Footage had been taken and never seen again. Some claimed that in the early hours of a March morning, a group of researchers had descended into a newly discovered shaft beneath the Sphinx's temple, only to find their way sealed by officials before sunrise. There is no proof, only silence. But silence can sometimes reveal what speech cannot. If one stands before the Sphinx at dawn, when the desert air is cool and the horizon blurs between gold and shadow, one can feel the strangeness of alignment. The Sphinx faces the exact point of sunrise on the spring equinox, when night and day balance in perfect symmetry. Perhaps the builders understood something we have forgotten, that the earth itself moves in rhythm with cycles far older than our civilizations. The monument, the chamber, and the pulse beneath it may not be separate phenomena, but one system, a harmonic mechanism built to resonate with the planet's own frequencies. In ancient Egypt, sound was sacred. Priests used chanting not as worship, but as calibration, to tune the mind and matter to the same vibration. Could the Sphinx, with its vast mass of limestone and its buried cavities, have been designed to amplify these resonances? In experiments conducted at nearby temples, researchers found that low-frequency tones produced standing waves, invisible patterns of vibration that altered brain states and induced trance. Perhaps beneath the Sphinx, in the hollow that breathes like an invisible lung, the ancients once summoned the frequencies of creation itself. Modern science dismisses such speculation, yet physics offers strange sympathies. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's natural electromagnetic heartbeat, vibrates at roughly 8 cycles per second, a frequency known to influence human brain waves. Some engineers believe ancient structures were built precisely to harmonize with this field, creating spaces where consciousness could shift, expand, or even commune with something beyond the material. If this is true, then the chamber beneath the Sphinx may not contain objects, but experiences, engineered not to preserve information, but to awaken it within those who entered. The Egyptians never separated knowledge from initiation. To know something was to become it. To enter a sacred chamber was to die symbolically, to pass through the gate of silence and return transformed. Perhaps those who descended beneath the Sphinx in antiquity did not return at all, not because they perished, but because they were reborn into a dimension of memory we no longer recognize. Even now, in the stillness of night, the Sphinx seems to hum faintly. Sensitive instruments placed near its paws have recorded subsonic vibrations, not caused by wind or tremor, but by the resonance of the rock itself. Could this be the same pulse the ancients once called the voice of the lion? Beneath its stone heart, something endures, a quiet, steady rhythm, older than empire, older than kings. It is the tempo of erosion, the cadence of precession, the slow turning of epochs. To listen is to feel time itself breathing beneath your feet. What would happen if we opened that chamber now? Would we find scrolls, relics, or something less tangible? A field of vibration, a silence that erases thought? Perhaps that is why it remains sealed. Perhaps to disturb the pulse beneath the Sphinx is to awaken not knowledge, but memory. And memory, in the wrong age, can be destructive. And so the paws remain folded, the entrance unopened, the pulse undisturbed. For now. One day the sands will shift again, instruments will hum, and once more beneath the lion's gaze, we will hear that slow, rhythmic heartbeat rising through the stone. When that happens, we will have to ask ourselves one question, one that may decide whether we are ready to know what the ancients knew. What if the secret beneath the Sphinx was never buried to be found, but buried to keep the world asleep? The story of the Sphinx does not end in Egypt. Its shadow stretches across oceans, through drowned continents and half-remembered myths, into the oldest dream humanity has ever told, the dream of Atlantis. It is whispered that the Lion of Giza is not merely a monument, but a memory, a surviving piece of a civilization erased by the flood that reshaped the world. To speak of Atlantis is to invite disbelief. Yet fragments of its echo persist in almost every ancient tradition, and as the evidence beneath the Sphinx grows stranger, the line between myth and memory grows harder to draw. Plato's dialogue, Timaeus, remains the first record of Atlantis, a civilization of immense knowledge and power that vanished in a single day and night of catastrophe. His source was Egyptian. The priests of Sais, he said, told Solon that this island kingdom once ruled beyond the pillars of Heracles before its pride summoned destruction. But the priests added something often forgotten, that Egypt itself was the child of survivors. The wisdom of the Nile, they claimed, came from those who fled the rising seas, who brought with them the knowledge of stars, architecture, and time. If the Sphinx predates the pharaohs, if it was indeed carved in an age of torrential rains, could it be the work of these survivors, the last architects of Atlantis? The notion is not mere fantasy. Geological records confirm that around 10,500 BCE, at the very end of the Ice Age, the Earth underwent violent upheaval. Melting glaciers raised sea levels by more than 300 feet, drowning entire regions that once stretched along the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. Cores drilled from the ocean floor reveal sudden floods of fresh water and debris, the scars of continents collapsing. To the ancients who watched their world disappear beneath the waves, it must have seemed like divine punishment. Yet perhaps it was only the earth resetting its breath. Among those who survived, memory became myth. In Sumer, the flood became the story of Utnapishtim. In the Bible, it became Noah. In Egypt, it became the Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods walked with men before the deluge. Across the world, the same story repeats. A world destroyed, a few who remember, a promise to rebuild. If the Sphinx belongs to that era, then it is not Egyptian in origin, but Atlantean in inheritance. Its builders, displaced and scattered, may have sought to preserve their memory, not in words, but in alignment with stars that do not drown. Stone endures when language dies. The connection grows stronger the deeper one looks. Both Egyptian and Platonic accounts describe a sacred geometry governing the cosmos, a harmony between heaven and earth expressed through number, proportion, and vibration. This is the Atlantean code, the belief that reality itself is structured by resonance, and that by aligning structures to these cosmic frequencies, one could bridge the gap between the material and the divine. Every element of the Giza Plateau reflects this principle. The Sphinx faces east, aligned with Leo, the celestial lion. The Great Pyramid's angle encodes pi and phi, the constants of creation. The distances between the monuments mirror the ratios of orbital periods. The entire complex forms a harmonic grid, as if designed not for worship, but for synchronization, a machine for remembering. Perhaps the Sphinx was carved not to preserve the past, but to awaken the future. And when the day comes that we finally decode its proportions, when we understand that the same harmony-shaping stars also shapes thought, perhaps the pulse beneath the Sphinx will quicken again. And then we will face the question that haunts every legend of Atlantis, not where it was, but why it fell. The answer, like everything else beneath the Sphinx, remains sealed, waiting, listening, patient as the desert itself, which remembers everything, even what we choose to forget.